This episode is brought to you by Facebook. So you were scrolling on Marketplace, and there it was, the bike you'd been searching for. You sent a message, and it turned out the seller was super chatty, kind of funny, and an avid cyclist. The next thing you know, you're in a cycling crew. Well, a community cycling group. The thing about Facebook, you might find more than what you're looking for. From a browse to a bike ride, this summer find more on Facebook.
Hey, all you heroes, hawks, crows, rooks, and inquisitors. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and theorize about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode will be covering a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we'll cover it all.
There will be spoilers, and always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or She-Cup.
That you are, and we are here to talk about Dragon Age, and we are moving on with our country's rulers of Thedas, and so we are headed deep into the deep roads, underneath the surface, to the Dwarven Empire.
Yes, we are. And I mean, I know we started with Teventer, but like honestly, we probably should have started with the dwarves.
Right.
But
Thedas' original peoples.
This is where we're at. This is where we're at. It's gonna be fine. So yeah, we are gonna talk about the Dwarven Empire, and I know, in the past on the podcast, we have focused a lot on like Orzammar in current time periods, and we're gonna talk about all the rulers, of course. But on this episode specifically, I do also want to talk about the Dwarven Kingdom in its prime and what we know of that and what it looked like, because I do feel like that's a lore subject that we just don't know as much about. So I did my deep dive. We'll get into it. But first, we've got some fun facts.
All right. I'm super excited about that.
All right, great. Me too. First fun fact is that in the dwarves' heyday, they outnumbered humans, obviously, but also they outnumbered the elves too, which really stumped me for a minute. I had to think about what that meant and was very surprised when I processed it.
Yeah, I guess with this, it makes sense. And I think the Dwarven history is really what gives a more kind of wrench into the Chantry story than the Elven history does.
Yeah, I totally agree 100%. Because honestly, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before. We both feel like the Elven story actually lines up pretty close with what the Chantry teaches. At least, there are some details for sure that are different, but general big picture, yeah, okay, they're pretty synchronous. The Dwarven one is where things go a little off the rails. But I don't want us to get off topic, because today we are focusing on the political history. So my second fun fact is about one of the rulers we're going to talk about today, and that is Orsec Garal. He is the only paragon to be known and referred to by his last name. Most paragons are known by their first, Paragon Branca, Paragon Caradin, etc. However, most kings go by their last name. However, he is referred to as King Orsec. So when he's a king, he is referred to as his first name when most kings go by their last name. And when he becomes a paragon, he goes by his last name when most paragons go by their first name. It's just a funny little, like, how did this even happen? Probably they were writing the story and didn't think about this guy being different.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you think this is like something that's like actually happened, but or if it's just a thing of they just forgot. Like,
I think it's just happenstance because like this lore goes all the way back to Origins. So I don't necessarily think, oh, it's something the Veilguard writers forgot about. Like, I don't think that's it. I just think it's just one of those quirks of whoever was editing didn't catch this, and so it's a fun little oopsie that we get to call out on the podcast.
All right, well, that's always fun. I look forward to hearing a little bit about him, but I think let's just dive into that Dwarven history.
Let's do it. Okay, so in the prime of the Dwarven kingdom, the ancient Dwarven Empire, and I'm talking like before they shut the doors of Orzammar, before they moved the capital to Orzammar, like back in the day, back in the ancient age. This empire spanned the length and the breadth of Thedas, so north to south, east to west, and it encompassed a vast number of taigs, all of them connected via the deep roads. You know this. However, one by one, over the years, each of these taigs, starting with the outlying ones, would fall to the Darkspawn, and they would all become separate kingdoms until only two were left, and that would be Kalsharok and Orzammar. There is a lot we don't know about this time period, but I want to get into what we do know. So the records of Orzammar's memories go back tens of millennia, which means over 10,000 years. That is a lot of history, and there's absolutely no way, if we had it all, that we could do all that in one episode. But it's important to note there are significant gaps in these memories, especially the ones of the earliest years. I think, I think we can surmise that, like, okay, sure, some of the gaps are due to the records went missing, they decayed, the ravages of time got to it, that kind of stuff. However, what I want to call out is we also know the Shaperate of Orzammar explicitly refuses to prohibit the alteration of memories. In fact, they do have a practice of altering memories. We see that in Inquisition. And so it's not quite public knowledge that they do this, but I imagine a lot of the memories that have been quote unquote lost have really in actuality been removed.
Okay, so I want to pause here and just give some context for this. Actual recorded surface Thedosian history is only a couple thousand years.
It's more than that because the current Dragon Age is almost 1,000, and I want to say we go back in the Ancient Age into the 3,000s.
Okay, so we're looking at 4,000 years, which is a normal, our own recorded history is only about, probably 6,000 or 7,000 years old. We have some stuff that's older, and obviously relics, cave paintings and other things that we have found in there, but actual recorded history does not go back that far.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the dwarves have a history that goes to 10,000 years is pretty impressive. However, you know how in high school we're taught history is unbiased facts and all these things, and then you go study history in college and they're ha 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 joke.
Yes, similar situation.
Yes. And I think that this is a great example of the Shaperate has an agenda that they want to push, which is maintaining the status quo and supporting the status quo of the systems and quote unquote religion of Orzammar.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I did look it up just to confirm. I think I said earlier that elves have been on Thedas since the 3000s, but I meant to say humans have been in Thedas since the minus 3000s in the Ancient Age. And then I looked up when elves and dwarves made contact, and that is minus 4600 Ancient. So they have been at least some kind of communication for a little over 5,000 years.
Right. Okay. So that makes a little more context. And I just wanted to bring up that like having a recorded document history that spans this amount of time is ridiculous. Though I guess, if we really believe in the preservation of our own documents, we thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Bible, the Torah, these things. We have things that go back this far.
Yes. We do. I just was going to say that, like, this is a big number to say. That was my whole point.
It is. Yeah, you're right. And it's a lot of history. So I do want to talk about, like, before the empire was established. We know that there were the Titans that roamed the land. They supposedly shaped the earth and they sang to one another. And so the dwarves believe that they were the progeny of the Titans. And we know that the Evanuris gave themselves bodies by using the blood of the Titans, aka lyrium. And this, very much angered the Titans and led the two groups to war. That's lore that we find from the end of Inquisition and also in the Veilguard. So in that process, the Titans' connection to the Fade was separated, which made the Titans tranquil. And their dreams, now locked away, mutated into the taint and the blight out of anger, fear, and confusion. And so that's when the dwarves really start to develop their empire, because they forget the Titans. They become more individualistic. They begin founding their kingdoms and they begin selling lyrium for gold. And so that is really the genesis of, I don't want to say Dwarven civilization because that's not accurate, but the Dwarven kingdoms as we know it are so connected to the elves, the Evanuris, and the fall of the Titans. And so without that happening, I don't think there would be a Thedas as we know it today.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And like, with what we know about the Titans, I know this isn't a Titans episode, so I'll be brief. Like, even though we learned, I feel like, a lot in the Veilguard, we still don't know hardly anything about the Titans. And there is this obscure reference in Mythal's theology and like mythology that she struck down the pillars of the earth, which a lot of people have long theorized that means the Titans, and I think Veilguard basically confirms that. But it's really, really interesting to me with like the way that the Titans are, because it kind of echoes back to a lot of fantasy worlds where, the gods create these different races or whatever, but then there's this one god that is almost like outcast or whatever, and they're the ones who create the dwarves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's a great point. It is. And I do think the Titans are so interesting, and I wish we had explored more of that in the Veilguard. But very, very little. What we do get, it all comes through Harding, which we'll talk more about that whenever we do her character deep dive. And I know we've talked about her before, but we're going to devote a new episode on a character deep dive to her, just because we get so much more in the Veilguard. So anyway, all of that to say, that is what we know of the Dwarven peoples before the Empire gets established. So I want to get into kind of the establishment of the empire. And it's important to note, I want to note this, the Shaperate memories start with a Thedas that is entirely devoid of humanity. We know that. That's not new. But elves ruled the land and dwarves ruled underground. And so they had these separate spheres of influence, and that's how it started. And that's kind of like the quote unquote ideal that they look back to.
Yeah, and that they weren't on the surface. Like they traded with the surface, but like all of their like daily life was kept underground.
Exactly. So, according to the legends, there were 7 brothers who founded the Dwarven Empire together. Blodlik is the legendary king of these 7 brothers. He is the youngest, and he founded the noble caste. And you guys are going to have to forgive me. All of this comes from codex entries, so I have no idea how to pronounce any of this, so just bear with me. Kiatshet was the eldest of the brothers, and he trained his sons to defend the king, and he founded the warrior caste. Shotkyar founded the artisan caste. Orzat Yar forged the first of the swords, and he founded the smith caste. Orzammar dug mines that became the foundation of the Tig bearing his name, Orzammar. His descendants named it after him and formed the mining caste. Kopar, twin to Nacht, founded trading, which would later become the merchant caste. And Nacht, twin brother to Kopar, was wounded in battle, and after recovering, he swore to serve Blodlik's sons, and they became the servant caste.
I think the first thing that sticks out to me in this is obviously, and I bet you're going to guess, is that the youngest brother is king.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I don't know. I can think of a story with the youngest brother who becomes a legendary king and has all of these older siblings.
Yes. And if you're curious, she is talking about David in the book of Samuel, who is a youngest child who becomes king of Israel, and is like the king of Israel, one that they consider to be so great. But it's just really interesting to me because you picture Orzammar and the Dwarven system as like so hereditary, so caste-based, so like, oh, you inherit this, you're the eldest son. Like everyone has their role, and like immediately it's flipping what we in our preconceived notion of our world would expect.
With the oldest being the king. But not only that, it's interesting to me that Orzammar is like somewhere in the middle. Like Orzammar, the brother, is not the eldest nor the youngest. He's just the middle brother who dug a bunch of holes in the ground.
Right. And I just think that like this is why Orzammar and Kalsharok survive in this way, is I just think that they're so well fortified.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So those are like the foundations of who forms the empire. I want to talk now about some important moments in the empire. So we know that sometime between minus 1195 and minus 975 ancient, the dwarves fight a war against something called the Scaled Ones. Ultimately, we know that the Dwarven Empire won this war, and the Scaled Ones retreated and then disappeared. And we've never heard from them again. So that's just a feather in your cap, I guess. But according also to quite a lot of different sources, including the World of Thedas Encyclopedia, many codex entries, the Prima Officia Game Guide for DAO, and David Gator himself on Twitter, dwarves are responsible for introducing so many technological advancements to Thedas. So this includes, I just have a whole list here, the common tongue of language, like shared a common language, currency, trade, and entertainment itself to humanity specifically, clockwork, mechanical weaponry, steam power, and more. And then I have a quote here that comes from the Stonehammer's Gift Codex. It says, many scholars claim the Teventer Imperium owes their rise to power as much to the dwarves as they do to magic. The dwarves brought currency and commerce to humanity as well as entertainment.
Yeah, so this is really, really important because it's if you're not really like diving into the codexes and really reading things, especially in DAO, you're not going to pick this up. But the dwarves hold so much economic power
Mm-hmm.
in Thedas. And it is to a point of like the Chantry did not want to anger them. No country in Thedas is going to wage war on Orzammar, at least not well, because they rely so much on lyrium.
Right. And that's really it. That's what it comes down to is like every society, even for Eldon, even the ones that like don't have mages at the top of their government, like they all depend on lyrium because, all right, yeah, the mages depend on it in Tevinter, but then outside of Tevinter, the Templars depend on it to maintain order. And so everybody's using lyrium in every country. And so without the dwarves supplying that lyrium, if they decide to cut you off, the Templar order and some of your societies are just going to crumble.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, it makes it really terrifying. Sorry not to interrupt you, but it makes it really terrifying that in DAO, the Darkspawn come to the gate of Orzammar and almost take it over.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, all it takes is one Darkspawn incursion to wipe out the deep roads, and then all of civilization is going to crumble. I don't think I realized how fragile it was until I did the research for this episode.
Right, exactly. And like there are just ways they could figure out lyrium or something like that. But like mages can use magic without lyrium, but Templars cannot control mages without. Well, I guess they can because of seekers.
Seekers can, but how many seekers are there?
Not a lot.
Right, exactly. So, okay, let's get back to the Dwarven Kingdom because in its prime, we know there were 12 great taigs and there were many numerous smaller ones. We don't know the names of all of the great taigs and all of the smaller ones, but I've compiled a list of all the taigs that we know about that have done something of note. So we have Kalsharok, who is the original capital, and they are now a kingdom of its own. We've got Orzammar, who is the current capital and kingdom of its own. Kalharal was the center of smithing knowledge, and it was reclaimed in 931 Dragon. Gundar fell in the Ancient Age, was always connected to Iduken Taig, and was a kingdom of its own. However, it has always been the weakest of the original kingdoms, and so that's probably why it fell in the Ancient Age. We also have Hormak, which was a former capital of the Kingdom of Hormak, and that fell in -35 Ancient. Darmalin was Thedas' greatest source of gold. According to legends, the gold and silver veins of the city ran so deep that they made the entire Taig sparkle. I would love to go to this one. That is such a great, idea for a place. I want to see it represented.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And then we have Fellhammer, which fell during the first blight. We have Hedron, who served as a very important lyrium mining center. We've got the Iduken Taig, also known as the Ruined Taig in DAO. And then there is Bonamar, which is known as the Dead Trenches or the City of the Dead. It was an ancient fortress designed by Caridin, former headquarters of the Legion of the Dead. Now, this one was lost in 913 Dragon.
Yeah, right before the events of DAO.
Yeah. And then lastly, we have Catalash Taig. This was a sanctuary for elven refugees from Arlathan. Kalsharok basically destroyed the city when they discovered that they were harboring elves because they didn't want to jeopardize their relationship with Tevinter. And then we have Kadash Taig, which was built upon Catalash Taig. It's unclear to me if they're counted as the same, if they're different, but they're grouped together for our purposes. And then before we get into more modern stuff, I just want to say after the first blight, the four like main kingdoms of the dwarves, which were Orzammar, Kalsharok, Gundar, and Hormak, they all kind of lost communication with one another entirely. And so about around minus 195 ancient, they all started electing their own kings and queens and nobility. And then they maintained allegiance in name, at least, to the ruler of Orzammar. But by this time, they're really operating as their own thing.
Yeah. It's just really interesting that they still maintain like allegiance to the rulers of Orzammar.
Well, I think they're probably, fearful of retribution.
I guess that's fair.
All right. So I do want to talk about the systems of governance before we get into our mid-break, because I think it's important to name, like, we're not really sure to what extent the empire of old of the dwarves and the different kingdoms governed differently. We don't really know the details on that, but I think there's enough overlap between all of them that we can kind of talk about this generally. Essentially, I think the dwarves have always been ruled over as a monarchy, not necessarily an absolute monarchy, but more of a constitutional one, because they do have some checks and balances via the assembly, via the shape-writ. The assembly does hold enough power to advise the ruler, the king usually, to approve or veto their acts, propose new policies, declare paragons, and even elect new rulers if that is needed. Meanwhile, the shape-writ very much works in conjunction with both the monarch and the assembly because they're the ones that oversee matters of civil disputes. The dwarves very much look to the shape-writ as kind of this neutral third party in both like legal and social disputes. And so the shape-writ is kind of the one that sets this legal precedent. They're the ones that determine the authenticity of documentation, of wills, that sort of thing. And they're also the ones that kind of say whether, okay, well, this contract is binding, this contract is not binding. So that's all of the shape-writ's responsibility. So that's a very important role. And then combining that with the knowledge that they actively edit and remove memories from the record is a little bit too much power for me to be comfortable with it. But that's how it is.
Yeah, I think the shape-writ's ability to just alter history as they want it to see fit is a huge problem in Orzammar.
Yeah. And to be fair, we've only ever really gotten that information from Volta, and so we're not sure how deep that problem goes.
Exactly. And I think that I'm sure that the king might know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. But speaking of the monarch, they typically hold their position for life unless they are removed or replaced in some way. They are always the leader of war and aggressive actions against other territories. And then lastly, the monarch has authority over the Legion of the Dead. So that's pretty much what we know about the Dwarven Empire before we get into our specific rulers. Do you have thoughts so far?
Just that I find the dwarves super, super interesting, but they might be the society in Thedas I want to be a part of the least.
Yeah, I personally need the sun to live.
Right.
So that's me. But I think it'd be really fun to visit Orzammar and be a tourist and see it. But I wouldn't want to live there. Not just because of the sun, but also because it just feels like there's so many rules you have to live by. And I'm even comparing that to Orlais. I would rather live in Orlais. And that's saying something. Y'all know how much I don't like Orlais.
Right. Well, and when we take Orlais, Ferelden, even to Venter, the way that the politics of the nobility and the government like really affect the everyday life of the individuals in those countries is very small. Whereas you take organizations like the Qun or Orzammar, and it very much does.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've always said the place I would want to live the most is Antiva. I mean, you basically don't have a government, so just putting that out there.
Yeah, Antiva or Ravane.
But anyway, I think if you don't have any other thoughts, we can head to our mid-break.
All right, let's do it.
I've got this nefarious plan to go around to each of them and secretly tell them all the nasty things you said. That way they'll mutiny and I shall become the group leader.
You know, we have more comfortable rooms and basically infinite space, so why
does the trained assassin prefer a quiet, unassuming spot with good choke points?
Guess you just answered that question.
Besides, I'm closer to the coffee.
Just wondering if the feathered pauldrons are an essential part of the moody rebel mage persona.
What are you talking about?
I'm working on an epic poem about a hopelessly romantic apostate, waging an epic struggle against forces he can't possibly defeat.
What do you mean, can't possibly defeat?
Well, it's not a good story unless the hero dies.
So welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons, and a special thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can do so at DA Lorecast or patreon.com/DA Lorecast, and sign up there and come hang out with us and do a lot of stuff. We'd greatly appreciate it. Another great way to support us is leave us comments and reviews on Apple or Spotify. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. And today I have a comment from Matthew A. on our Emmerich episode that says, "Great episode. It seems like an oversight to have Emmerich to volunteer to be on a team of people fighting dragons, darkspawn, and an elven pantheon if he's afraid of dying. May have been more accurate to explore his fear of non-existence." I think that, yeah, I would agree with the sentiment of this. I think we're walking a fine line between fear of death and fear of non-existence. I think Emmerich is like, when he's fighting, that fear isn't really like present, but what his fear, I think, is that the idea that he won't be around to witness everything, that he'll leave people behind almost, I think is more his fear.
I think it's more of that, like, it's not just people, it's that he'll leave work unfinished, whether that is his relationships or his actual work in Navarra. Either one, I think both apply. But yeah, I mean, and I will just say, we had a really great conversation about this and the choice you get to make with regard to Emmerich in our Discord server. So if you want to join in, that's the place to do it.
Yeah, and that's a great little segue to join our Discord. And that is all I have for the middle of the show.
All right, let's get back into it.
This episode is brought to you by Facebook. So you were scrolling on Marketplace, and there it was, the bike you'd been searching for. You sent a message, and it turned out the seller was super chatty, kind of funny, and an avid cyclist. The next thing you know, you're in a cycling crew. Well, a community cycling group. The thing about Facebook, you might find more than what you're looking for. From a browse to a bike ride, this summer find more on Facebook.
My people have heard legends of the Grey Warden's strength and skill, though I suppose not every legend is true.
That's really helpful. What are you, the elven god of sarcasm?
Lies, treachery, and rebellion, depending upon the story. And how could I help? I do not have my ritual dagger. I cannot access my network of mirrors to travel from the lighthouse to anywhere in the world. All I can offer is what I know.
Helpful advice from the elven god of, and I am quoting you here, lies, treachery, and rebellion.
Depending on the story.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right. right, so let's get into some rulers of the Dwarven Empire. Before the capital of the empire moved to Orzammar, we know it was in Kalsharok, right? Subsequently, that's also where all of the royalty lived. During the reign of King Indran Stonehammer, we know that it was moved. But I want to get into some rulers who came before and after, but right now before the legendary Stonehammer. So, as we said earlier, King Blodlik was the youngest and the wisest of the 7 brothers who founded the Dwarven Empire, and he founded the noble caste and was the first king. Coming after him, at some point in time, we have Kelgak, who expanded the deep roads to connect Gundar and the Idukan Tig. The next one that I have is Orsek Garal. So Orsek Garal is mentioned a lot in Origins, especially if you are a dwarf origin. He is paragon and king of the Dwarven Empire, and he ruled during a time of expansion and greatness at the same time that Tevinter was growing in power. And so Garal had been working for a long time toward an alliance with Tevinter. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be finalized until after his death. But we do know the First Blight destroys like a lot of the records of his reign. But due to a journal that Shaper Volta discovers, Orsek Garal ruled during a time when a Titan awoke underneath Hedron Tig. It was also due to this that Garal had the idea of moving the capital to Orzammar. This would not happen until Stonehammer became king, and so that's why Orsek Garal's reign is really overshadowed and defined by Indran Stonehammer because he is his successor and best friend, and so. Indran Stonehammer, just to get into it, he succeeded Orsek Garal as king. As we mentioned, he does a lot. He really capitalizes on Orsek Garal's reign, and so Stonehammer is the one that finalizes the formal relationship with Tevinter, fighting none other than Archon Durenius in the legendary proving battle that we talked about on Archon Durenius's episode. And then after Durenius's death, Tevinter gets plunged into this tension and turmoil. And so that's another reason why King Stonehammer was like, hey, Orsek's idea to move the capital to Orzammar, we should really do that. We're going to do that right now. And so he moves the capital. It really helps increase trade with the surface, which makes total sense because the Orzammar geographic location is so much better suited to trade than the Kalsharok location, just by nature of, okay, it's on the border between Orlais and Ferelden. It's very close to the Free Marches. It's on very close to the Waking Sea. So it's just in a better geographic location as well.
I also think that it's better for it to be situated there, especially like strategically with the rise of the Tevinter Imperium. And just, you don't want your capital to be in Kalsharok, which is so close to Tevinter, when you are the ones supplying them the thing that feeds their magic. And should they go to war, it would be easy for them to invade you. Whereas it's really, really hard. If someone tried to invade Orzammar to take control of Lyrium, like if Orlais tried to do that, I feel like Navarra and Ferelden would be right there in Orzammar to reinforce it.
Yeah.
To kind of stop them. Like they have more allies to come upon so that the wars of the surface don't influence them.
Well, that's another really great point. Totally agree. So yeah, that it helps trade. It does a lot. But not only does he move the capital to Orzammar, he also greatly expands the city. He builds the legendary Stonehammer Hall, and he reorganizes the Orzammar Proving Grounds to allow for these massive tournaments. So he does a lot for the Dwarven Empire, and he gets named Paragon on his deathbed in minus 1131 Ancient. And I want to mention this because it's so interesting to me. His first and his only act as Paragon was to name his best friend, Orsek Garal, Paragon as well. I'm sorry. The history remembers them as best friends. I don't think that's what we're working with here, y'all.
I don't either. And I feel like, yeah, they're gay.
Like, there's no other option here. Like, yeah, it has to be.
Yeah, that's all I have to say.
That's all she wrote, folks. We're gonna move on. So, one of the other really great kings is Iduken. And if you play a noble dwarf in Dragon Age Origins, you are part of this family. So, originally born to the warrior caste, Iduken the First. He's not referred to as that, but that's how I'm going to call it because it makes more sense. So he's born to the warrior caste. He is not famous. He is not significant in any way. He never entered a single proving, and he never sought to elevate his status in the caste. He spends almost all of the years before the First Blight fighting skirmishes with the Darkspawn and bandits in the Deep Roads. He was happy to live a life with his wife Annika and their children. And that's his early life. Like, he's just a simple man, a simple warrior. And so the Blight begins in earnest in -395 Ancient, and the Dwarven Empire gets caught in a vicious war among the nobility, as they are wont to do. Most of the warrior caste is caught in the middle because when word of the attack spread, they were sent to defend the Tigers and rulers. No house would agree to sacrifice their holdings for the sake of another. And so that's how, once again, the Darkspawn spread to the gates of Orzammar, because the nobility, they're too arrogant to accept help from one another. So in the midst of all of this chaos that we've seen a million times, Iduken the First took command of the armies, albeit grudgingly. He enlisted the mining caste to collapse overrun passages. He called on the smith caste to supply arms. And he bypassed the assembly and the noble caste entirely to do all of this. And they were too busy infighting to even notice. Iduken the First even witnessed the Darkspawn horde himself being led to the surface by Archdemon Dumont.
Wow.
I know, and I'm not done. Like, there's still more.
I can
it's
see.
insane. It's insane. He does so much. So Iduken the First's leadership really, like, single-handedly saves Orzammar and the Dwarven race. Once again, like, how many times do we have to tell this story? But he is the only paragon to have ever been voted in unanimously with no debate. There was only one single abstention from the vote, and that person was brutally murdered by his colleagues for abstaining.
Wow.
I know. It's also said, though, that Iduken the First also had a terrible tendency toward sinking into a depression and melancholy. He often entered into these moods, lamenting that he was not able to save more of the outlying Tigers surrounding Orzammar. In his later years, these moods would really lean into more of an obsession, where he became obsessed with Orzammar's safety and security and making sure that what he went through would never have to happen again, which, as we know, it does, sadly. But King Iduken the First is entombed in the Tig chamber of Iduken Tig, of course, and his descendants would form House Iduken after him, with 9 kings rising from its ranks, and the hero of Ferelden too, potentially a paragon.
Wow. Okay, so it really is just more telling, like, Balin, why are you such a little shit? But just a lot to unpack here. But I really want to talk about the fact that, like, he does so much. He's almost unanimously voted a paragon, and then the one person abstaining is brutally murdered. What is with the dwarves and going to decisions and assemblies, and then once a side is the victor, they murder the other side?
I don't know. They do it a lot.
Like that happens in Origins, regardless of who you pick. Haremont kills Balin's supporters, and Balin kills Haremont's supporters.
Right, but with this, it's not even Iduken killing his
right
antis. It's just like they decided, like, no, you should have been with us.
Yeah, so now you die. Like there is, again, this is another reason why I don't want to live in Dwarven society. There's no room for dissent. There's no room for conflicting opinions. That I'd probably be brutally murdered.
Yeah, you probably would. Yeah, so I mean, Iduken is so instrumental and influential. Like, it's insane how much he does. He should really be remembered in the great rulers of Thedas.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's going up there with the first Penegast, Callahan, Theron, Cordelis Draken.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so my next one is King Valtor, and he ascends to the throne in -260 Ancient. And it's during his reign that Caridin discovers the golem making process. It's actually only 5 years into his reign, so it's the beginning. And so Valtor has the grand idea to create golems from the casteless, the criminals, and the political dissidents, which would be Austin.
Correct.
So Caridin, he really opposes this idea greatly and destroys all of his writings that explain how to create golems. And so Valtor, though, he does manage to preserve enough information to punish Caridin by forcing him to become a golem himself, in punishment of, pushing back against the king. And we know, Caridin takes the Anvil of the Void and he vanishes, blah, blah, blah. That is only 11 years into Valtor's reign. So what is significant about this king is that it only takes 6 years and one king's reign, not even 6 years of one king's reign, to go from discovering this great boon, this thing that could really change Dwarven society, to ruining it.
Right, and I think like Caridin was happy to like take volunteers and do this, but like when it started becoming like people forced into it, that's where he draws the line, which like is a reasonable line to draw.
Right, and like it's so crazy to me because like they have the Legion of the Dead. They could have just replicated the Legion of the Dead for the golems and made it basically like, okay, it's this great honor, like when you die you get returned to the stone, like your name is recorded forever in the memories, like we have so much respect for you, we're gonna give you a funeral and a send-off before you go become a god, like it could have been this whole grand thing, but they ruined it in their greed.
Right, which is like a general like fantasy mythos of dwarves, is that they ruin things in their greed.
Yeah.
Which is rooted in anti-Semitic European ideologies, but that is a general stereotype of dwarves.
Well, I mean, I think it's also a stereotype of people in general. Like it's a theme. Yes, we apply it to dwarves, but it's a theme that comes up for us when we write stories because it's what we do as humans.
Yes, we're never satisfied with
what we have.
Yeah. We always have to have more. Look at our world.
I know.
Look at like we need more profits. We're not settled. Certain people are trillionaires, and I bet they're not thinking, "Oh, I'm satisfied. I can stop." I bet they're thinking about how they can be a multi-trillionaire.
No, they're throwing trash at the moon. Let's not get into that because I'm gonna get mad. So, the next ruler we have is one of the very few queens mentioned in the histories, Queen Geetha. In the second year of her reign, she sent the Legion of Steel, which was an all-golem regiment, to recover Caridin and the Anvil of the Void. None returned, and 126 golems were lost. Due to this loss, she was pretty much immediately deposed as queen. And Brother Genetivi writes, quote, "The Shaper of Golems refused to support any further attempts to find Caridin, and the Paragon was officially declared dead. The Shaperate never recovered from the loss of an entire legion of golems and never again allowed an all-golem regiment into the Deep Roads.
Interesting. Yeah, and like, there's so many lost golems. I'm thinking about in the Deep Roads of how often we just stumble into a room and like, here's a crazed golem that's just attacking anything in sight.
Yeah, it happens all the freaking time.
Yeah. It's almost like you shouldn't have forced people into that and they go crazy when you do that.
Could be.
Okay, so I have two, before we get into King Threestone, I just have some like general Dragon Age Thedas lore I want to discuss.
Yeah.
For a long time, and I just made this connection, so forgive me if we have talked about it or you have made this connection before, but we talked about a long time about how Genlocks you can have a Genlock emissary in DAO.
Yes.
And like dwarves don't dream or anything like that, but now like with the DAV, this makes sense because the Blight are the dreams of the Titans, which are the dwarves' connection to the Fade, which is their connection to magic.
So becoming a Genlock, becoming a dark spawn, basically like reconnects them to the ability to be magical.
Right, and I know that it's kind of complicated because a ghoul doesn't gain access to magic, and a Grey Warden does not gain access to magic. But Grey Wardens do dream.
Grey Wardens do dream, but number one, a ghoul is not a dark spawn. A ghoul is just a person who's been infected with the taint. A Genlock would have to be born from
a brood mother. Yes.
But I think you can argue that a Grey Warden, it's not that they do magic. Well, some of them do magic because there are some that are mages. But like, I think there is something... There is magic around them. Like, they have the kind of protection from the taint. So I think there's magic in that. It's not necessarily something you cast, but I think there's a connection there.
Right. I just was thinking about that. This makes sense. Like why the dwarves, when they become Grey Wardens, it's not that they're connected to the archdemon and that's why they dream. They dream because they're reconnected to the Titans in their like blighted dreams. So that was that kind of thing. And so the second thing I wondered is like perhaps, and this is just a theory, the Anvil of the Void is a construct that maybe Caridin didn't create, but Caridin discovered as a relic of how the Evanuris created their bodies.
That's interesting.
That was just a crockpot theory that I had.
Well, we love a crackpot teacup theory. Maybe we can explore that one on a future episode. There's something there. Write that down.
Okay.
So, the last king I want to talk about in this episode is Threestone, and this is kind of where we end. Before this is kind of like the end of like the ancient Dwarven kingdom rulers, and then next time we'll get into some of the rulers of the different kingdoms. But the next one is King Threestone, and he is single-handedly one of the most important Dwarven kings to ever exist, because without him, the Dwarven race would have probably died out completely. In -40 Ancient, King Threestone seals the Deep Roads to save Orzammar from the Darkspawn, separating it finally and fully from Khal-Sharrak, Gundar, and Hormak. And we know that Gundar and Hormak would fall to the Darkspawn not long after this, with Khal-Sharrak being the only one standing until currently.
Yeah, and who knows what happened to Orzammar now?
Well, it's still standing.
Yeah, I know. And I know all the countries of Thedas are still standing at the end of DAV.
Yeah, but they all have a lot of rebuilding to do.
Yes. And I think that what we have here is like, I think you can see this progression in the rulers of the separation from the Titans pushes them inward and more selfish, where you have the other kings like the one who I can't pronounce, and then Stonehammer and Bloodlick or whatever, like they're very like community focused and dwarven focused in that way. Stonehammer making his friend Paragon and all of those things. And then you have Iduken, who I think is very like forward and community focused in that idea. And it's really after Iduken the First, and I know, as we said, that's not his title, we start seeing these rulers becoming more and more insular to its pinnacle of Three Stone making this decision, and in a way, in his effort to save the Dwarven Empire, he dooms it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a fair criticism for sure. I mean, this decision, it's one in desperation. It's not that one that he says, "Oh, I just want to do this." It's a last ditch effort. And so like if he hadn't done it, they probably would have fallen. And who knows what would be standing now. But the important thing is they never opened it back up after the blight. And we don't know, could they have? You know what I mean? I assume no. But I don't think that was ever tried.
I think I agree with that. And like, it's from here on out, this decision that Orzammar is almost always operating in a mindset of scarcity, even when you could argue that they have abundance.
True. That's so true. And I mean, it's from here on out that the Dwarven Empire really does change, which we'll get into on our next lore episode. So with that, I think we can get into our side character, who is a very important dwarf and one who has frustrations with all of these things we've been talking about. We are talking about Thyrell, who is an ancient Dwarven paragon. And if you, like me, hate the hissing wastes in Inquisition, you may have no idea what I'm talking about. It took me probably until the third or fourth time I played Inquisition to even hear of a mention of this guy. So Thyrell is an ancient Dwarven paragon. He lived at least, possibly longer, but at least 100 years before the first blight. He was a shaper of runes and a member of the Smith caste, and he developed weapons of great power. Inevitably, his fellow dwarves began to use his runic inventions to war with each other. And so Thyrell took his house and several others, and they left for the surface. There are some ancient texts that hold that it is unclear if Thyrell left for the surface in order to avoid a war or escape a war. But regardless of which one it was, he left and he went to the surface as a paragon.
Burn.
Yeah, it's a big deal. The official memories of Orzammar say that he died in the Deep Roads, but we know due to surface records that you can find in Inquisition that he settled in the Hissing Wastes and established the only above-ground Tig, Cal Reparta. In the Dwarven language, Cal Reparta means a place where they may meet in peace. There are inscriptions on many of the statues, and they are in quote-unquote Old Dwarven, which is another demonstration of just how long ago these ruins were built. After his death, Thyrell left the ruling of the Tig to his two sons. They worked together side by side for a time. Each son ruled half of the Tig. Sadly, and perhaps inevitably, the sons argued and dueled one another, with one of them dying in the duel at the hands of his brother. The living brother built the tombs in the Hissing Wastes to honor his family amid his regrets. And we can only assume that after this, the dwarves scattered and fled and left the above ground Tig.
This is a fun quest, and I know people hate the Hissing Waste because it's really hard to travel and it's really spacious and all of that, but like it's a fun quest in a lore, and you need it to get the kill 10 high dragons achievement.
True, you do indeed.
Yes, but it's really, really interesting, and it's really good, like good world lore, and it brings to a point with like this side character, and why I think it's important is that when dwarves go to the surface, they become more communal, mainly from a thing of like they have to.
Mm-hmm.
But like I'm thinking about the Merchants Guild in the
free marches.
In the free marches, which is a group of dwarves, surface dwarves. And that they really do kind of, except for like people like in Bianca's family, they kind of really reject the caste systems of Orzammar, and they reject the idea that from your circumstances of birth set you in a certain path forever. And so I just find it interesting that when they return to the surface, when they start interacting with other races more frequently, the quote-unquote selfishness that happened because of the destruction of the Titans lessens.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. But I also think it's not that they become... I don't think it's that they disregard the caste system. I think they create a new one, which is based on wealth. And so in a way, they become more like humans. In a way, they just replicate a different version of their society and make it more human-like.
Right. Which inherently gives them like more freedom to move around because anyone can acquire wealth.
Right, exactly. It also, though, takes them further away from their culture, I think.
Yes, but I just thought that was interesting. But I really love this quest, and it's a very tragic story of sons who can't share and end up...
Well, and not to make another biblical comparison, but it does kind of remind me of Jacob and Esau a little bit.
Yes, very much so.
With the brothers warring against each other.
Yes, very much so.
But yeah, so that's our first Dwarven lore episode. We're going to have several more, so stay tuned.
All right, well, thanks for bringing this. I really enjoyed this episode and the research, and I look forward, I assume, we're heading into more modern rulers of the Dwarven Empire.
Yes, indeed. We'll talk about modern rulers. We'll talk about paragons. We're going to cover it all.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the research, and thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. If you have any lore questions, topics to cover, or side character suggestions, join the Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's the best place on the internet.
You can also support the podcast financially and ensure its continuation by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/DALorecast. If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review or comment, or join the Patreon.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio podcasting network. If you enjoyed our intro or outro music, give a big shout out to Pipeman Studios. Until next time, look to the sky, the dawn will come.